Hi, these notes are to accompany the section 6.2. They're printable there on Moodle, so you could copy them off and use them. They accompany the reading on page 345 through 347. And we're going to be doing converting fraction notation to percent notation. So the fraction notation, they have a little box there on page 345. It tells you there's two steps. Okay, so we have two steps. Step number one is to take the fraction, convert it to a decimal. To do that, you divide. Step number two is to take the decimal and turn it into a percent. So let's take a look at a couple. Let's take a look at 1/4. I want to take 1/4 and convert it into a percent. So I'm going to divide to convert it to a decimal, I divide. So I will take my 4, divide it into 1. Oh, problematic, isn't it? Because 4 doesn't divide into 1. So I'll add a 0. 4 goes into 10 2 times. I have a remainder, so I'll add a 0 and bring it down. 4 goes into 25, and that ends it, doesn't it? So 1/4, its decimal equivalent is 0.25. That's step number one. Step number two is take the decimal into a percent. Remember, right into percent, rip. Left out of percent, lop. So I'm going into the percent, so I'm going to take my decimal right 2 places. I'm multiplying it by 100. I get 25. It's now in its percent form, so I need to remember to always include that percent sign, because it's not the number 25, it's 25%. Let's take a look at another one that's a little bit trickier, and that's one that has a repeating decimal, 5/6. Okay, I'm going to take 6 and divide it into 5. You can do this on your calculator if you want to. You don't have to divide these all out by hand. Well, 6 doesn't go into 5, but it goes into 58 times. We get a remainder of 2, add a 0. 6 goes into 20. Well, it's 3 times, isn't it? Because 6 times 3 is 18. And I get another 2. So I'm just going to keep getting that 3 on and on and on. So 5/6 is 0.83. The 3 repeats. Now there are a couple of fraction decimal percents that you should memorize because they're used a lot. One of them is 1/3. 1/3 is repeating 3s. As a percent, it's 33 point repeating 3%, or 33 1/3%. So whenever you see a 1/3 or repeating 3, you can always put it into 1/3. So let's take this 0.833, multiply it by 100 to move our decimal over, and we get 83 point repeating 3%. That repeating 3 is a 1/3, so you'll see it written as 83 1/3%. Again, always remember your percent sign when you get to the end. The other one you want to remember is 2/3. 1/3 is repeating 3s. 2/3 is repeating 6s. So memorize those two. Our second objective in this section is the trickier one, and that is taking a percent and turning it into a fraction. It's on page 347. Example 7 and 8 are the two that you want to pay a lot of attention to because they're the difficult ones. Okay, so let's take a look at the 2 steps to convert from percent to fraction. Step number 1, use the ratio idea. Remember that a percent is a ratio. Whatever the percent is always over 100. So we're going to write it as a ratio, and then we'll simplify whatever we get. If it's a simple fraction, we'll reduce it. There's a couple of other problems that we're going to have to deal with. I'll show you those in a minute. So let's take a basic one. I have 55%. That means 55 over 100. I can simplify 55 over 100. It's a fraction. I could use my calculator, or I could think, okay, both of those numbers divide by 5. I'll get 11 over 20. Well, there's some percents that are a little bit more complicated than that. Let's take one like 12.5 or 12.5%. I'm going to take my 12.5 over 100. Remember, with ratios, you can't leave a decimal in a ratio. It needs to be simplified. So in order to do that, I'm going to multiply by the number 1 in the form of 10 over 10. So it becomes 125 over 1,000. That will reduce to 1/8. And that's when you might want to use your calculator for the reducing. I don't expect you to do all those by hand. You might want to look in your textbook on page 348. They have example 7 that shows you exactly what to do there. Okay? Let's take 8.25%. Well, I need to do something with this quarter. 8.25% is 8.25%. Then I could take the 8.25 over 100, write it in its ratio form. This time I have to multiply by 100 over 100 to clear that decimal in the numerator. 8.25 will become 825. 100 times 100 is 10,000, and 825 over 10,000, I need to use my calculator to do this one, is 33 over 400. So you get some odd fractions in this section. Let's take a look at one more that's a real difficult, tricky one, and it's example 8 on page 348. Let's say I'm not going to do the problem exactly like that one, I'll do a different one. Let's say I have 3 1/3%. And I want to turn that into a fraction. Well, the 1/3, I can't put it into its decimal form because it repeats, so I can't write it over 100 with a repeating decimal and clear it by multiplying by 100 because I've still got the repeating decimal. So I'm going to use the definition that we had of converting to a fraction by multiplying by 1 over 100. 3 1/3 times 1 over 100. Remember, when you're multiplying fractions and there's mixed numbers involved, this 3 1/3 I'm going to convert to an improper fraction. 3 times 3 is 9, 9 and 1 is 10. That's 10 over 3. I'm going to convert it by using the definition of a fraction times 1 over 100. Excuse me. I know that the 10 and the 100 both reduce because 10 times 10 is 100. I can multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. I get 1 over 30. They show that example 8 on page 348. So here's some notes on converting percents and fractions.